You know, that was super embarrassing the very first time that you all did that to me, and I had no clue that you had put that together. But thanks so much for letting me host. Again, like everybody else, I wish I was in Lisbon. What a beautiful city and what a beautiful place to be. This panel, we're going to talk about the future of organizations, which I'm sure most people that run organizations or are part of large organizations are trying to figure out what the heck is coming and how to plan for that. So I want to thank Hugo and the team for assembling this panel of the people that you see on the screen. A very diverse people and very diverse background. And then when I saw the list, I went, holy crap, we may not can fit this into a 1 hour time block. So I'm just going to ask you to kind of buckle up a little bit, and this should be fun because I know these people, and they all have very interesting, look at this, thanks Nigel. They have very interesting and diverse opinions. So I want to introduce you to them, and when I introduce you, give it a big wave. So Evan Campbell, I'm going to start with you. Evan is the Chief Transformation Architect at GTM Hub. He's a Senior Technology and Business Executive with leadership and management consulting experience in product innovation, lean and agile technology, product software development. Can you put any more buzzwords in there? And digital, agile, and Hilton led hundreds of organizations in highly engaged, innovative knowledge worker, and he helps companies realize peak performance and competitive advantage. Hi, Evan. President and Principal at Agile Business Institute. He's a CST who consults globally on agile hardware and company restructuring, bringing multinational companies increased return on capital. He's a TEDx speaker and a guest lecturer at both MIT and Oxford University in England. His work has been featured on Forbes, Harvard Business Review, CNN Money, the Discovery Channel, and did we have to pay him to be here? Joe Justice, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Lurie, who we spent a little bit of time together getting to know each other. He's from his home in San Diego right now, but he's originally from Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a partner at McKinsey & Company and heads their agile practice. He spent nearly 20 years of his career working with over 100 different companies on their business success. His professional passion is to help advance the well-being of people everywhere. Michael Lurie, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Howard. Great to be here.
And last but not least is Nigel Thurlow. Nigel is the CEO of the Flow Consortium and the co-creator of the Flow system. He is a professional Scrum trainer, PST, who designs organizations that are highly optimized and customer value focused. He advises companies on successful transformation strategies and how to achieve effective and lasting change. Hi, Nigel.
Good day to you, Howard. I am so looking forward to this panel.
It truly will be. And I haven't seen the rest of them, but I have the feeling much of them would be much more tame than what we're about to do. So I was thinking about this whole idea of the future of organizations, and I think we'll all agree the world has forever changed. I mean, none of us were alive in 1918, 1919 during that great influenza pandemic. So for us in the world of business, this is new for us, and the world has changed forever. Business and organizations are looking to determine what's next, or better said, how to build the organizations of the future that can adapt to the next change to create workplaces that are joyful, sustainable, and prosperous. So let's get started. I broke this up into just a few categories. And Joe, I want to throw the first question to you, and then as you answer that, we'll let the rest of them kind of add to it or detract from it. Depends on how well you do. And this comes from me and from just a personal experience, and I know it must be something that other organizations are sharing, is that shoved everybody into remote work immediately. It's affected organizations around the world. There's just a few of them that it affected for the better, like mask sales, instant hand sanitizers, and Zoom. I wish I had that stock. But most have taken big financial hits. And what do you think the long-term effect is going to be, and especially to all of the ones like us that have large buildings, when now we're going to be debating this, is it better to be back in person with some risks, or will we be remote? So what do you think the future of organizations as a result to that will be, Joe?
I'm honored to be asked that question, and what a fantastic, I'm truly humbled to be on a panel with the people that are on this panel. These are people I would be amazed to have a hallway conversation with if I was so lucky. And I get to be on a panel with all of you. Thank you. I'm starstruck, and I'll do my best to add value to that answer. Spending the last year working in Japan, I realized that when COVID arrived, the sanitizing habits didn't need to change much. People already wore masks across much of Asia when they felt they might be sick, to try to protect other people from whatever it was they had, the common cold or maybe even worse. And people would attempt to stay 2 meters or approximately 6 feet distance at all times. In Tokyo, that's extremely difficult, but even in narrow aisle, small grocery stores, when you're actually living there, you're actually going to the grocery stores and not just the hotel. People would wait at the end of the aisle for you to finish your aisle shopping. And they would expect you to walk quickly through the aisle and make your purchase so they could stay 2 meters. Even on the trains, where a lot of the time you could stay 2 meters away. But yes, at the peak of rush hour, you're packed. You're packed, but seldom touching. You scrunch in. I do think that, I think, then having gone to Switzerland and Seattle and a few other places, a few other countries, seeing people start to move in a movement pattern that I said, wait a minute, I've seen people move this way before. Oh, it's like people normally move in Tokyo. It's like people normally move in Japan. And I'm seeing some aspects of the Asian culture become global. So that's an aspect. More to the financial point is what happens with all of the expense in office space globally. One is many companies are selling. They're selling on their leases, and there are some buyers. So some companies like Facebook, which are digital first companies and they're doing fine financially, are buying up mass office space. Seattle had the largest office space boom in the world in the last 3 years. I'm currently in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. Facebook is buying up much of the glut of office space. And it's not entirely clear what Facebook's immediate plan will be with that, but they can afford it. And it's helping the companies who are now getting some money back from their long-term lease. So that's part of it, is you're seeing a consolidation. So there's an opportunity to sell at, yes, a fraction of the lease, but not zero, because there are buyers. Amazon is also expanding in office space. Many of those companies are. Now, a better use is to make higher use and get ROI on the square footage back. I spent the summer, my COVID job was working at Tesla Motor Company, where I operated Agile at Tesla from the global headquarters in Fremont, California. And I did see what an Agile first company does with physical space. 1, it's astounding. 2, it's inspiring. 3, it is the future. And 4, it's something other companies can do with their vacant space. And in summary, you'll hear more about it in my keynote tomorrow and in my upcoming book, Agile Hardware. In summary, it's robots are your physical work, and humans become really good at robotic interface. The same way developers in software are very skilled around. We're robot developers. And your right arm virtually is a Fanuc robot, and your left arm virtually is a KUKA robot. And you do have mass value, enormous return, as Tesla proved financially. I was there with one of the largest stock. I got to be in the company as that happened. The speed at which the robots are to do something different, the speed of change, the agility, is the governing factor for financial performance, and that has everything to do with physical space. So cramming unused office space with the affordable, approximately human strength robots, about 20 kilograms moving through a 12-hour shift, is so impossibly valuable. You can then lease that potentially as an Amazon fulfillment sorting center and become part of that supply chain or engage anywhere. But in terms of office space for human use, at least not at the moment, maybe never needed when we look at the productivity change when people were given the option. Now that said, some people would love the break from working from home. They don't have their home set up to be the optimum office. So you will have some folks opt back in, but the current office configuration is going to have to change. like we're seeing even in countries that are back in the office or offering it, like Italy, like Germany, like Switzerland, like France was for a little while, like England was for a little while, where you have different precautions and the floor layout, the office floor layout is different. So either if you're going to refactor the layout anyway, stuff it with robotics or sublease it to someone who will.
Wow. I never expected anybody to say the future was robots. Anybody else here? Nigel, you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I love Joe, of course, immensely. I've been lucky enough to work with him over the years, and so I understand a little bit of his psyche. But yeah, it's a scary thing, the whole robots thing. I'm looking forward to Arnie Schwarzenegger clones taking over the world as AI and robots sort of dominate everything. But I sort of came from it from a slightly different angle because of the remote working thing. I think that mental health has become a real issue. Even I felt that personally. And you have these mood swings from sort of abject misery to elation, and you know, am I becoming a bipolar or something of this nature? And I even went and had a brain scan, unrelated, but I asked them, I said, have I got some issues in there? And they said categorically no, which annoyed my wife because I told her I wasn't really off the chain. And so that brought me back there. But no, empathy around people, empathy around much more critical. Of course, psychological safety has suddenly become the hot topic for everybody, and I've been talking about it for a couple of years, but now everybody's talking about it, so that factors in. The other thing, I wrote an article a few weeks ago, probably a few months ago about this now, is that one thing I've noticed is a lot of companies, when they send everybody home, figured on all these things they used to do, this red tape, bureaucracy, nonsense, all these wasteful processes, they just chucked them out. They stopped doing them because people weren't in offices and there wasn't the need to do them. They actually focused on how do we run the business about machines and repurposing space and automating many things is, well, actually, we don't need all that nonsense. So are we actually going to bring it back when we bring people back? Because people will come back, hopefully. Hell, I hope they do, because we need those human interactions and those close working relationships with people. But if we don't bring back all those wasteful processes, we've eliminated all that red tape and all that nonsense, then we're going to see a lot of roles alone no longer necessary. We're definitely going to lose unskilled labor and even semi-skilled labor where we start putting automation and machines and other things into plants and spaces, and when we start moving more manual activity to machines. But what are we going to do with all these people that used to do all these meaningless, mind-numbing processes? We should ideally retrain them, reutilize them, and use that powerful knowledge work. I know, Joe, I'm sorry. So we're going to have to focus much more on human behaviors, much more on human factors. We've seen a lot of the craziness with mask wearing, the anti-vaxxers and the anti-mask wearers. And of course, Joe and I have both been in Japan. Joe spent a lot more time than I there. And the behaviors I was talking in Singapore the other week, and the behaviors there mirror Japan. It's just a respect for people culture and the fact that I wear a mask to protect everybody else, not because I'm worried about myself. It just tends to become human nature. So we start to look at how behaviors will have to change as the world starts to evolve from this. These were just a few of my thoughts. I am terrified about, the machines taking over the world though, Joe. I'll throw that out to anybody else who wants to pick that ball up.
I'm happy to build on that. And I would agree with much of what Joe and Nigel are saying. So Howard, apologies if we can't make this as controversial as you maybe wanted. But I would just add maybe a couple of things. One is, we're discovering that this has been an enormous catalyst along the lines of what you've both said, for companies and senior leaders to really think fundamentally differently. I think we've published a couple of hundred articles on McKinsey.com covering pretty much every aspect of the enterprise across all industries, and it's really playing out in a way that nothing really ever has, at least in our professional lifetimes. So it's a tremendous opportunity for all of us in Agility. And, as an example, tomorrow we're meeting with the top team at a major organization in Latin America. And what they want to talk about is how do they fundamentally reimagine their organization to be permanently a blend of on-premise and remote. And I suspect there's thousands of organizations having that conversation today. So they're taking it very seriously, and they're anchoring with, and how do we shift our operating model as the top team so that we personally, maybe we go in 2-3 days a week and we work from home 2-3 days a week, and that becomes our new normal. So it's fascinating how real this is and what an opportunity this is for all of us in this area.
It is the opportunity is the thing that most organizations, most people want to try to harness in this. And that's going to be really, really interesting. I'm going to move us along a little bit and take the next question to you, Evan. So the other question that I've been thinking about is this whole idea of long-term planning. So when COVID hit, many people were in the middle of their 7-year fixed plan and went, holy crap, right? And so now they're trying to do another 7-year long-term plan on starting for 2021, and they have no idea what's coming. So is it even worth it? We've seen this disruption. How do you think it affects strategic planning, and what tips would you give a company trying to make decisions about 2021, 2022, 2023? How does strategic planning work in the world of organizations in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't know that 7-year plans make a lot of sense for a lot of organizations. I mean, if you really have a capital intensive business where you're, building nuclear reactors or fleets of airplanes, there are elements of your planning that have to acknowledge those lead times and the inevitable uncertainty or inefficacy of predicting things that far in the future. So I'm a strong advocate that plans are essential for most businesses. I do a lot of strategy execution work, and in the agile and adaptive strategy execution space, this is OKRs and things like that are designed to be highly flexible to increase the responsiveness of the organization and the empowerment of the employees at the periphery near the customers to make better decisions in alignment with the strategy. You can't do strategy execution alignment if you don't have a strategy. The point is having the problem would be an inflexible strategy that doesn't sense and adapt to or environmental threats, competitive changes, et cetera, right? So I'm a strong advocate of having a 2 or 3 year plan or at least strategy that you're moving towards. And this means really having good mission, vision, values, and ideally some 2 or 3 year objectives that have some tangible measures that you can work towards. And then as you move those enterprise objectives and you're aligning, not cascading, at the division level, at the team level, at the product line level, potentially at the individual level, everyone's having a conversation about what their contribution is in the context of the larger organizational objectives, mission, vision, values. That's absolutely crucial in this environment. Because, and I know you have a separate question about it, so I won't cheat and go into organizational hierarchies and OD. But we really for organizations to be adaptive and sense and respond quickly and compete and win in their ecosystem, they're gonna have to push the brains and the power and the sinew and muscle down to the people in the organization that can make better decisions faster. And without a strategy, there's no North Star for them to steer to.
And Joe, did you want to jump in there?
Oh, so much. I appreciate it. Evan and Howard for kicking off that topic. What I'm observing, I primarily work with agile hardware, right? The advantage is it's easier to see the supply chain. Like you can point to geo coordinates and say, that's the boat that has all our heat pumps on it. And so we don't want to change that heat pump design until that boat gets here and we use those, right? But then you look at the factory over in X in your supply chain and you say, and they are continuously making more heat pumps. So we do want to change that design as soon as possible so the ones being made can be different, right? So what I'm learning is the planning cycle needs to accommodate 4x the longest link in your supply chain. And that's it. Now that makes the risk the length of your supply chain times 4. And that's why vertical integration is kicking everybody's butt right now, because the supply chain is shorter. So the net risk is shorter. So the planning cycle is shorter, so they can actually be an agile company. Like that's it, that's the math. So in software, your logistics tree, the length of your chain cycle appears to be, what I think I'm learning, is 4x the length of your longest vendored contract. So if you have a vendor that has an 18-month delivery to you, or you have an SAP license for 3 years, well, that's your actual decision-making agility. And that's where many of these large consultancies, like we just heard from in the brilliant introduction by Daryl Rigby, have articles recommending be agile in the C-suite, but don't have a scrum master or a product owner. Don't actually run a rigorous scrum team. Don't meet every day. Meet once a quarter, maybe, or maybe on demand. Because so many companies have such a long decision-making tree, that makes sense. But if you actually have an agile company, like that practice would never work in Tesla. You have to replan about once an hour because it's so fast. And if you want to make that much money in the stock market, you couldn't not have someone making prioritization decisions, scrum, rigorous scrum in the executive room, and you couldn't not have your daily scrum once an hour. It'd be too slow. But many companies, their supply chain is so stretched out in software or hardware that they have maybe a quarterly cadences break through fast at 4x.
I just read an article the other day about a company that has a plan for 6 weeks. And then everything after that is a bucket. It's not even an ordered list. It's what they call options. And they have a goal and a mission as an organization, but they realize that seventh week, they have no clue what's going to happen. So those are just listed as options in no particular order. And as every week passes, they actually pick the sixth week. We move 1 week and we pick what's that thing in that week. And they just move that way with some guiding things that I think Evan was talking about. Michael, do you want to jump in here on the topic?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'd make there's always a recency thing and how we think and speak. So let me start with what you just said, Howard. When you're dealing with a smaller organization, I think a 6-week horizon or very short horizon can work. When you're dealing with 50, 100,000 people globally, which are most of the organizations we work with, that's a recipe for utter chaos. It's just going to be blunt and practical. So I would concur that you need to understand what the rhythms are for your space. It varies dramatically by industry, as both Evan and Joe indicated. And that I think the key, though, is to recognize that we're unbundling and relearning what we mean by strategy and strategic planning, just like pretty much every other process in the organization. So, a couple of things I would highlight. One is that we emphasizing the difference between direction and a plan. Very, very important to have very clear direction, to have that North Star that Evan mentioned, yeah? Mission, vision, values, whatever language you like to use. We find more and more companies are anchoring on true purpose, like bringing more value into the world kind of purpose. So and it's got to be something that resonates in the human heart, right? That unleashes people, that people voluntarily will kind of want to align with. It's constant strategy making. So the notion of strategic planning is probably a little anachronistic, but there's constant strategizing that's needed over different time horizons. So we've been thinking for a long time in the 3 horizons, which is horizon 1 is the near term, horizon 2 is the thinking of all those horizons every day is really important. And it's also important to recognize that strategizing, again, building on what others have done in the organization. So today we actually need frontline teams to think strategically, just like senior executives for the whole system and increasingly the ecosystem. So everybody is strategizing just with different frames of they will abandon each other, but they get the balance right in terms of, that level of coordination, that level of strategizing. And those timeframes. To adopt a 90-day cycle as a core rhythm of operating and thinking and replanning, if you will, which is a huge shift, right? When your whole system's been set up for decades around an annual cycle, and you seem to shift the whole enterprise to a quarterly cycle, that's a 3-year journey. That doesn't happen overnight, but that's an indication of the fundamental way that organizations are rethinking, strategizing, strategic planning.
Hmm. Nigel, you got a little bit you want to add to that?
No, I was just giving him the thumbs up because I was agreeing with him, and actually most of them covered everything, because the whole North Star concept, some sort of lean thinking is much, that's where we're heading. But as learning emerges and other things emerge, our understanding changes and our direction changes. That's something scary we might call agility, or even business agility. So, crazy concept. And maybe a good segue into one of your other points that you'll bring up is that I was in a conference the other week, and we were talking, and a colleague of mine, Jay Bloom, who runs global transformation at Red Hat, said the C-suite shouldn't be making strategic decisions. The people closer to the work should be making strategic decisions, and the C-suite should be solving problems. So there's a nugget I'll throw out to the audience.
It's a little upside down. That's a little upside down organizational pyramid there, isn't it?
Just a bit.
Michael, that's a lovely segue to a business agility conversation, but I'm going to ask to kind of reserve a comment to build on something great that Michael made as a point, which is that planning horizons and sense and adapt cycles at the strategic planning, portfolio, strategy execution, feedback levels are all crucial skills to develop as we divorce from the historical tyranny and the inefficiency, the waste, I can't think of enough bad words without swearing, but annual budgeting is the biggest crime in inefficient asset allocation imaginable. And so as we move that conversation forward, I want to pick up on that thread because Michael made a really important point that we need to flesh out. So I'll leave it at that, Howard.
Absolutely, Evan. We'll make sure we get back to that. But Nigel brought up a point about kind of organizational design and pyramid, and that was one of my other questions was, we all kind of started the world of work for our generation started in a very Tayloristic, hierarchical type of a view. And then over the last decade and a half, maybe, we've seen a lot of organizations move to a much flatter organizational design. And I'm wondering with all the changes that have happened, when we start thinking about the future of organizations, do you see the future of organizations, even that movement to flatter organizations getting stronger, or because of the chaos that's happened and fear, most organizations make decisions based on fear, will they pull back to more hierarchical with the false sense of security that might bring? So I'm just kind of wondering organizational design, and if it's not hierarchical or flatter, what should an organizational design be for the future of organizations? Nigel?
Yeah, I know. I was scribbling endless notes here because I'm sort of, my brain is all over the place. But this thing behind me, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this thing in the middle says distributed leadership. And distributed leadership is a model that I've even written a book about. It's out soon. Look out for that. But it's something that we're talking about a great deal in industry now, where we're starting to look at, we still need some centralized coordination. We still need some centralized control. We're not sort of having the lunatics running the asylum, as Dave Marquette puts it, a bunch of arrows going in different directions. We do need the business version of commander's intent, which is leader's intent, where leadership are giving their intent and the workforce, the people who make the value appear, give their intent to how they're going to deliver that. But we do need to sort of reduce the power distance index, work by Hert Hofstede in the Netherlands, which is really about bringing the decision-making closer to the people who do the work. And as Dave Marquette says, move the authority to where the information information is, or basically move the decision to where we do the work. So distributed leadership models are going to become much more appropriate. And as we start to work in scaled agile environments, which are effectively multi-team systems, lots of small teams coexisting, cohabiting, existing together, we need shared mental models, shared cognitions, these types of things that we need to focus on developing. And actually in the keynote I'm giving, I think it's tomorrow or Tuesday, I should really find that out. But in the next couple of days, I'll give a keynote. I'm going to be talking about this gap in all the frameworks, because we've all represented, taught, discussed, and sort of promoted different frameworks and approaches. But the one thing that the frameworks sort of leave out, they give a cursory nod to, but they leave out is teamwork, the human factors element. They all say you need to be a team, and you need small teams, and you need this, but we don't actually teach people how to be teams. So I'll leave some of that commentary to my keynote, but some of the roles that are going to have to change, we're going to be seeing new functional roles coming in where we're repurposing middle management. So rather than middle management telling people what to do and receiving PowerPoint presentations every Friday morning of status and some of the nonsense, they're actually going to be armies of problem solvers. They'll become, there's a definition in leadership theory called boundary spanning. So the middle managers become boundary spanners. They span the boundaries between different teams and different multi-team systems. This is beyond the Scrum Masters type of idea. We're talking about somebody's keeping the teams focused on what we call distal goals, so goals that are further away from the team organizational goals, how we pull the teams together, their collaboration, their communication, when we bring in effective debriefing as opposed to marshmallow and pasta stick sort of retrospectives, this type of thing, get rid of that nonsense. And then when you talk about the sort of move away to this distributed leadership, you worry about being lurched back to command and control, which you mentioned Taylorism, but I've been looking at Taylor's works more recently, and companies like Toyota have much more in common with Taylorism than you'd actually think, because breaking work down into small pieces came from Taylor. Time and motion studies, what we now call just in time, and the sort of forefront of a lot of our agile thinking came from Taylor. The way we treat people has changed, thankfully. The respect for people and respect for humanity has changed. So as we move more into this, we're going to see the application of things like the Cynefin framework, which I know a lot of us teach in our different practices. But Cynefin, for those that are unfamiliar, splits sort of complexity thinking into 5 key domains. And we've got the sort of disorder or confusion in the middle. And then we've got the right-hand side, which sort of talks about complicated areas and clear areas. So simple things which anybody just does habitually versus their chaos. You still need command and control. You still need leadership that makes decisions and tells people what to do. Everybody's running around panicking, their heads loose. The pandemic was a good example of a massive, not just a shallow dive, but a deep dive into chaos. We needed leadership. We needed people who just stood up and told us what to do to actually get us functioning. Then we're now moving into sort of complex problem solving, where we're using things like weak signal detection and sense-making techniques to help us understand how to solve these complex problems. I hope soon we'll pull them back into the right-hand side of the Cynefin framework, which is where we can sort of apply expertise to actually solve these, and we've got a sort of a planned way to execute. I think I'll leave it at that and throw my madness out to everybody else.
Speaking of command and control, you're done. Joe, in the middle of chaos here, your experience in Japan and in Tesla, I'm wondering about the more flatter organizational structure and teams making the strategic decisions. Do you see that? Do you see that as a future movement, or do you sense that
very charitable view to ask? If you don't mind, can I ask you that question? So Howard, you lead in a product owner role, so in a prioritization role, the company that's steward of the most recognized Agile credential professionally in the world. And you are steward of that for hundreds of people engaged in it professionally and hundreds of thousands of people using it professionally. And you're right in this pandemic. So instead of us who have a range of experience of doing to talking about it, you are doing. You're in what would have been in a traditional company, an executive role. But in an agile company, you're in a prioritization and response role of a company in the middle of this change. May I, as a member of the panel, ask you, the pointer of the panel, to say, how are you experiencing this? Does it feel flatter? Do you think you need to go back to more rulemaking? Is it because it was chaotic and you had to get command and control, or was the organization anti-fragile enough that no, it was actually even more robust at being flat? What's your actual experience, if I may ask?
So the answer to your question is, if you may ask, is the answer is no. But I'll answer it anyway. Actually, for us, no. It reinforced the idea of distributed decision-making. What we noticed, we have 6 or 7 teams that are focused on customer personas, and honestly, for us, by the time it resonated in my head that we needed to make some serious changes, and when I went to talk to the POs of the teams, they had already made those changes. So the speed in which the change, even in a small organization like we are, was much faster because they were already able to sense and respond without waiting on me. Because if I'm the person that they're waiting on for every decision, we're an organization that will fail. Now, at a scale of 5,000 or 10,000 people, like Michael was saying, I assume that lag is even longer, but I still think that organizations will still move to a much flatter model. I just felt like probably some might move over. Evan, you're going to jump in here. I can see it.
Yeah, and I'll keep it really quick, but I can't resist the urge in this forum of excellent people, broadly, not just us, but all of our viewers in Lisbon, as well as this great. I feel like your question was, are organizations become more or less hierarchical? And the answer is yes, both. And the important point that I want to get out here is that ineffective reactive leaders will attempt to impose more control that will actually produce poorer outcomes and less adaptability in the organization. They will create Saddam Hussein's army. It was one of the 5th largest army in the world, but as soon as you cut off command and control at the top, the entire body was completely mindless and incapable of executing. That's what you're going to get from the reactive leaders. The leaders that have the awareness to create capability in the organization are going to realize that the pace of these disruptions is going to be occurring more frequently and more rapidly with greater swings in the sine wave of organizational stability. And they're going to be investing in creating resilient organizations that can respond to these pressures without top-down command.
Say so in a question. So we are all proponents of an agile way of working. So this whole idea of business agility, I don't think we can talk about the future of organizations without at least discussing it or broaching that topic. What do you think the future holds for organizations in terms of agility? What do they need? What do organizations need to do? Or what underlying essentials to become adaptive enough for the next VUCA type event do they need to start thinking about to get to that place of business agility?
So it's a lot is the short answer, but let me maybe offer a few elements. I think the organization of the future, business agility, is really about creating a human-centered organization that unleashes the full kind of passion and potential and capabilities of people to create value for everybody in the system. Right? So I think that's really what we're seeking to accomplish here, with a broader notion of what we mean by value. Value is something that fundamentally meets a human need, includes financial value, to really think much more holistically about value and think more holistically about stakeholders, and unleashing people to do that. And in order to do that, there's 2 primary dimensions to pay attention to. One is what we might call architecture. So that's the so-called hardware of the organization, not quite the hardware that Joe's talking about. But there's a structure and process and economics. We were talking a bit about org design a minute ago. And that needs to shift fundamentally. And in a nutshell, I think the emerging architecture is shifting from that command and control system to a network an open network of micro businesses that are operating in rapid cycles. So I think that's the shift there, and there's a lot contained in that. But companies like Haier, for example, a Chinese white goods manufacturer, comprises over 4,000 micro enterprises, micro businesses. Yeah, and it's an internal network, if you wish, that in many ways builds on the power of the free market kind of system. But it's married with something very important that we've touched on, but I want to call out really explicitly, which is culture. So any organization is both architecture and culture, and they both are mutually reinforcing all the time. They're actually in perfect harmony all the time. And if you want to shift the architecture of the system to be flatter and more open and more agile, you also have to shift the culture. And culture is a deep thing. Culture doesn't change quickly and overnight. It's about values and mindsets and behavior. And as you create a more open system, we're actually more dependent on culture because we're creating a system where people voluntarily are going to make choices than we are in architecture. So companies must pay a lot of attention, more attention than they ever have before, to the evolution of culture in parallel with the evolution of architecture. And what that means in practice is that it needs to start with senior leaders. Yeah. So by definition, a traditional organization that's command and control, as Evan was very clearly articulating with Saddam Hussein's army, using that kind of extreme analogy, if you will, all the power and all the thinking is resident in the senior leaders. It doesn't matter how many agile teams we stand up lower down in the organization, the system itself won't shift until the collective, a critical mass of senior leaders really shift. Yeah? And that means senior leaders, in our experience, need to go on a journey. They need to start reimagining how they think about business and organizations and leadership and themselves and their own lives. Yeah? And that's quite a deep journey. It's about shifting from a fear-based. You spoke about how fear is at the core of so much of what businesses do. It doesn't need to be. It's been true for a long time. It doesn't have to be that way. So leaders can actually learn to become aware of and let go of fear, to shift out of that reactive or fixed mindset, to use some of that language, and shift into more a self-authored, joy-based, purpose-based way of experiencing reality, of living their lives and leading organizations. And that's, again, a very profound shift. But if you start anywhere, my invitation would be to start with senior leaders. Start them on that journey. Go out and see the Teslas of the world, all the other organizations that are doing such incredible things. Go visit organizations in your industry that don't look like Tesla or Amazon or Google or any of those. They look like a major mining company like we've been working with across the US, or one of the world's leading conglomerates headquartered in Turkey, or major manufacturing companies in Asia. So companies in industries that you would think it's impossible to bring agility into those industries, into those companies, you would be surprised how deep this is going, how quickly it's moving, and how much it really starts with leadership and leaders making that fundamental choice to bring in this new kind of world that I think drives all of us really at a deep and fundamental level in terms of our professional passion and what we're doing here.
Michael, I'm trying to figure out how now we can give you an amen and pass a collection plate. That was exactly, we're all like, yes, 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 yes. Very, well said. We were asked to reserve the last 10 minutes, so thank you for Q&A. And I have some questions that have popped in that I want to be able to ask you. So we're probably not going to have time for everybody to respond. So if you'll all mute, and then whoever's the first one to unmute, you get to take the question. How about that? This one comes from Denise Canfield, and she's asking, how do you all have you approached leader transformation? Is there a hope for our senior leaders who grew up in the 20th century management? And is there an approach for a quick start in the agile mindset for leaders? Joe got it.
Thank you.
Ding, ding.
Thank you so much. Awesome question. I really appreciate something so high utility. Got to be asked right away. It sure looks like it, but it looks like they have to want it and be excited. And that's where inspirational stuff like movies has everything to do with it. And that's where inspirational stuff like good books, where you can see what resonates. And putting your author of this question, thoughts out there as blogs, as articles, as books, as video clips, as YouTube pieces, as movies, to see which of these leaders writes you back and says, I was inspired and I saw myself on the journey you described, then they're ready. But if you're hired in by mid-management to fix, I'm not sure if that's a likely recipe unless you're phenomenal at inspirational speaking.
Okay. So if you'll all mute again, and Joe, you can't play this time. So we have 3 of them get to play to see who gets to win the second one. This is from Pedro Silva. And Pedro asks, how different must the approach be in organization transformation towards the future of public administration organizations, since the public is profit and client dependent than the private ones?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that one, Howard. So we're finding that it's not different fundamentally. There's obviously important differences to be aware of. So if you go into a public sector organization with a strong anchoring around a particular methodology that's really was birthed in software, for example, and you cling to that tightly, it's going to be challenging. But if you understand the fundamental principles of what agility is really all about and how to transform an organization, it applies as much in the public sector as it does anywhere else. And our approach is similar in the sense that we would typically encourage 2 things to happen. One is to start a leadership journey, building on what Joe was saying in the last question. So invite leaders to start learning about this. Within the public sector, there's many public sector agencies we're working with around the world, including several governments at scale, seem to bring agility in to government, national government, as well as regional government. And at the same time begin to experiment. So that dual approach of starting with small-scale experiments, we can start bringing agility into certain parts of the organization, and a leadership journey is a great way to undertake the transformation in public sector and elsewhere.
One of the things I'm hoping that the current crisis might influence in the boardroom, and this kind of ties together with what both Joe and Michael were saying, was I would like to think that in nonprofits that some of this stuff would be a little easier. In large publicly traded corporations, you frequently end up as a CEO working to serve a board that might be putting a lot of pressure on you through incentives and staffing decisions of the senior executives to really manage and optimize for quarterly results. And I think that as we look at the current landscape, the organizations that are more adaptable and being more successful are the ones that are setting aside quarterly expectations to the market, the ones that are viewing a broader constituency than just public shareholders of their equities, and are becoming more purpose-driven. I am a hardcore capitalist. I mean, when there's a time horizon that extends beyond a quarter, and I'm hoping that one of the more positive things we might get out of this horrible dislocation economically is that people start to realize that you can't just meet.
Yeah. You actually answered the next question that we got in, and it didn't have a name on it, so I won't even call that one. But Nigel, you get this one because Evan hogged the time. So how about this one? This one's from Debbie Bray. And I think this is your topic anyway, Nigel, so this is great. Companies that were hit hard by the pandemic have unhealthy organizations that are severely depressed due to multiple layoffs and recognize the need for change. But they may not be getting that same perspective from their C-suite. What would you recommend for these companies?
Wow. That is I was listening to everything everybody else is saying, and I did get the good question at the end. I've had to deal with, in recent times, narcissistic and leadership, and even what in an HBR article was talked about, the psychopathic leadership, which doesn't sound as bad as it really sounds, or it's not as bad as it really sounds. I think I'm going to pivot back to the fact that we have to go back to change starts at the top. I like the idea of purpose-driven motives. A lot of organizations will describe purpose-driven motives, but the reality of it is most companies are for profit. I mean, that's the reality of life. Drucker talked about the only valid reason of business purpose is to create a customer, and I fully subscribe to that, but you got to make money. Otherwise, there's no ability to provide something for a customer. But I do think we've got to go back to looking at people, the human element, devolved power, distributed leadership, lots of terminology for this, starting to leverage the power of the people within the organization. Evan's drastic comment about Saddam, and Michael picked up on that. It is relevant that if you've got this leadership that have all been their positions, their glory, their capability, serving the board, making profit. And now they've got to start to rethink that, especially as organizations are being decimated by the changes that are occurring. So really, I'm going to come back to the topic of my keynote this week, which is really to start focusing on human factors. And I was writing it down as Michael was talking. Culture is a product of our behaviors. So leaders need to lead with characteristics and behaviors they wish others to emulate. If they don't, you'll get the culture you deserve.
I think that's probably the heart of that question, and I think I can empathize with where they are, because the C-suites in organizations that have just laid off large percentages of people, the workers that are actually at the front line of the customer there are completely demotivated. The people that are still left there think they're next. And from a C-suite perspective, they're doing what they think is right for the company, and there's a disconnect there to keep people still aligned towards a goal and towards a strategy. We're going together. And while they're doing that, they're letting people go. There has to be a strategy to emerge from that in a way. Joe?
I'll try to do it in less than 30 seconds. I believe I've observed the most effective instigator for leadership change that's not visionary. So if you're not Elon Musk, is to have a valid competitor that's visionary. And so either you try to build the capacity for visionary leadership in your company, the inspiration. I talked about books, movies, articles, where they see themselves on the journey. If you're not able to leverage that, it's then to join a visionary company or create one.
Go for it.
I would just offer, building on those comments, one maybe inspiration for all of us is to think about public health agencies right now, and the senior leaders of public health agencies. So, it's on record, we've been working with the World Health Organization. We're also working with a number of public health agencies, as every one of us. And so the confluence of events and circumstances facing senior leaders of public health agencies is completely unprecedented. And it's been an enormous challenge on them, but also an enormous opportunity to bring greater agility into that space. And in so many cases, the way in which we've each benefited from our local public health agencies has been because they've adopted, the different mindsets, the different practices that we're talking about here in agility. So looking for analogs like that, if that's not your space and you need some inspiration, might be one that's really timely and, that applies to all of us.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I just wanted to add to what Joe said, and I know we're out of time, but disruptive innovation is what Joe's talking about. And I'd highly recommend people go look at Clay Christensen's work on disruptive innovation. I've written some posts about it on my LinkedIn feed if you want to find a quick link to that.
All right. Well, I knew we would fill our entire time box. We could have had lots and lots of time boxes, but as Agilists, we want to respect it as best as possible. We're 1 minute over, but in all fairness, we started at least a minute or two late. So I appreciate the chance to get to visit with you all online. Like some of you said in the beginning, I wish we were together around a table having this discussion, and I appreciate the people that have signed on online to watch this. And I hope you learned something valuable from it. Hugo,